When Nissan decided to jump on the American luxury market bandwagon, Infiniti was founded on November 8, 1989. The brand launched with two models, the flagship Q45, which we've already covered on the channel, and the M30 Coupe. In September of 1990, Infiniti launched more of an entry-level sedan, but rather than competing with the likes of the Lexus ES250 or the Mazda 929, which were larger, more luxury-oriented sedans, it was more aimed at smaller performance sedans like the BMW 3 Series, or perhaps the sedan model of the Integra. Like the Integra, the G20 is front-wheel drive and comes only with a 4-cylinder engine. But before you say boring sedan, I don't want one, the G20 is powered by the SR20, the same engine used in the B13 Sentra SE-R, the GOAT of all Sentra models. Now everyone knows and loves the later rear-drive Skyline-based G models, but these Primera-based G cars have more going for them than their conservative styling might let on. So today, let me take you through the original G series Infiniti, the G20. Production of the G20 started on July 10, 1990, with the first models going on sale in September of that year as 1991 models. The G20 is essentially a rebadged Nissan Primera, a vehicle that itself aimed to compete with European models, hence the G20's aspirations to compete with the 3 Series. Admittedly, Nissan didn't really do much in the way of upscaling the Primera into the G20. In fact, on the early model years, they didn't even bother to paint the exterior door handles. You can get leather seats, but that's an option, and without it, the interior isn't that different from a top-trim Sentra. However, this was Nissan's peak era, so the interior plastics are pretty good quality, and you do get a leather-wrapped steering wheel, shift knob, and e-brake handle. Driver's seat adjustments are plentiful, but manual.
And gauges are easy to see and read, though we'd like more of them.
Pretty much all of the stocks and switches are out of the standard Nissan parts bin. When it comes to exterior styling, it's quite conservative, but I actually think it's pretty stylish. It has kind of a European look to it to me, which makes sense considering the Primera was designed with that market in mind. I don't even mind the black belt it wears, I think it kinda works for it, and it also makes the black door handles look a little less out of place. I like this Infiniti lettering on the back glass, a neat attention to detail. Take my money. However, I have to say, since they are already sharing so many parts with the B13 Sentra, and the door handles are black anyways, they should have just given this the B13 Sentra door handles, because they are the GOAT of 90s door handles. By the way, this unassuming looking exterior boasts a drag coefficient of 0.29, that's lower than a Prelude of that era. The G20 comes standard with air conditioning, cruise control, power locks, windows and mirrors, remote trunk release via a push button on the door, and a tilt steering column. Some of the switch placements are kinda strange because the window switches are mostly on the doors, but you know how the driver always has switches for all of the windows plus the lockout switch? Well, those are on the center console, as is the door lock button. But this switch placement does allow for some nice, satisfyingly large door grabs. No dainty little door pockets that you have to grab with 2 fingers here. Perfect for when you want to slam your door shut so you don't have to listen to your snobby neighbors tell you your little 4-cylinder isn't upscale enough for their gated community. Hey, park that Datsun somewhere else. This isn't the low-income complex. That's down the street. Yeah, well maybe you should park that Caddy somewhere else. This isn't the assisted living complex either. Wait until you tell them you shift your own gears. You truly are a peasant. The only real options were a power sunroof, the leather seats, and an automatic transmission. A cassette player was standard, but a CD player and/or a trunk-mounted CD changer was a dealer-installed option. You could also get fog lights as a dealer-installed option. Under the hood, as I've already mentioned, you'll find the glorious SR20, a dual overhead cam 2-liter that revs its way up to 7,500 RPM and puts out 140 horsepower and 132 pound-feet of torque. With the proper transmission, you can do 0 to 60 in about 8.5 seconds, which sounds slow by today's standards, but for an early 90s front-wheel drive 4-cylinder, that isn't bad. A 5-speed is your standard transmission, but like I mentioned, the 4-speed auto is optional. The G20 has disc brakes on all 4 corners and ABS is standard. Another notable thing about Primeras and G20s is they were the first front-wheel drive model to use Nissan's multi-link front suspension, a system that had previously been reserved for rear drive cars like the 300ZX. That means the G20 is happiest on curvy back roads where you can make the most of its agility. Save the straightaway for Mustang owners, they still might crash. In fact, in the slalom test performed by Popular Science magazine in 1991, the G20 was just barely able to outdo the BMW 318i. It also out-accelerated it by over a second, and braking performance was within 2 feet. All of that for just $17,500, plus $800 if you want leather and $900 if you want a sunroof. I believe the auto option was also $800, but you don't want that.
Wait.
In today's money, that's about $41,700 US, so a little less than a new Prelude Prius. By comparison, the cheapest Infiniti you can buy today is... Wait a minute. Do they not make any cars anymore? What? When did they discontinue the Q50? I didn't know that. Oh my god. The first notable update to the G20 occurred in April of 1993 as a mid-model year update. For 1993.5, G20s got standard dual airbags in place of those annoying motorized seatbelts. Leather interior now came with power seats, and the black belt line became body-colored. Heated mirrors was added as standard, the air conditioning system switched from R12 refrigerant to R134A, and remote keyless entry and power seats were added to the leather package. Then in 1994, they updated the grille, giving it black slats and a chrome outline. They also finally upscaled the door handles for 94, making them chrome. Tightening EPA regulations also led to a design change in the SR20 engine for 94. This variation has the fuel rail and injectors swapped places with the intake plenum. This is known as the low port design in comparison to the 91 to 93 engines, which are the high port variation. Apparently this reduces emissions, but power output remains the same, at least by what Nissan publishes on paper. Now, I've never owned one of these engines. My first car was a B13, but it was the 1.6 liter. I couldn't afford an SE-R. But from what I've read on the Nissan forums, although there is some debate, the low port seems to be the preferred design, and apparently if you swap an intake cam from a high port engine into a low port engine, you gain about 5 or 6 horsepower. So almost as much of a power gain as a red valve cover gets you. Some people do point out that it's easier to change injectors on the high port design, but this isn't modern direct injection nonsense. This is good old-fashioned multi-port injection, so you shouldn't have to be swapping out injectors on a yearly basis. 1994 and newer G20s also use OBD2 diagnostics, and there's a new touring model that's introduced. Badged as the G20T, this model gives you black leather with more highly bolstered front seats, a standard spoiler, standard fog lights, fold-down rear seats. Wait, that wasn't standard before? Okay, that's kinda cheap, Nissan. And most notably, a limited slip diff. Now in Canada, all manual transmission G20s of any model year have the limited slip diff, and we never got the motorized seatbelts, so I would say our G20s are a little superior, but good luck finding one. Also for 95, an in-dash CD player replaces the cassette as the standard audio system. After the 1996 model year, the G20 goes on a quick trip to the corner store to buy cigarettes and doesn't come back for 2 years. But it does return in 1999 for a second generation. Don't go away, we're covering that one right now. By the way, G20 shirts are available on my website for those of you that know what you got. Despite having 2 years off, the second generation G20 comes back almost looking like a refresh rather than a whole new model. The wheelbase is actually 2 inches longer, but the styling really just looks like an updated first gen. That's not necessarily a bad thing, at least not for me. I like how it looked before, and this is kind of just a nice slight modernization to it. And as you guys know, I live in the 90s anyway. However, I could see this hurting sales, as for many Infiniti customers, it might not feel fresh or different enough to warrant an upgrade, especially if their first gen was still running fine. We have to remember though, Nissan was going through a hard time and a pretty big cost-cutting phase in the late 90s. As we've talked about in other videos, they almost went out of business. But then again, that seems to happen to them about every 7 years or so. The new grille has vertical grille lines for a more upscale look, and while the G20 doesn't have particularly distinct styling, and it could blend in with traffic fairly easily, I like it. It's a nice, classy looking sedan to me. On the inside, it is somewhat Maxima-like. There is a pretty generic looking gauge cluster, and there's now a doubled-in cassette CD player combo unit. Most models have automatic climate control, unless you have a complete base model with cloth interior. But most of them have this leather and convenience package, which gives you leather, a power moonroof, the auto climate control, and a power driver's seat. To hell with your passenger, they can adjust their seat manually. That's out of budget. Keyless entry is now standard. Heated seats are now available in a package with heated mirrors if you have leather, and the touring model is still a thing, which still gives you that limited slip diff, a spoiler, and standard fog lights. You can get the touring model without leather, in which case you get sports cloth seats, and you can also get the touring model in an automatic option, if you wish. Under hood is also familiar. It's still the SR20. In fact, in 1999, it's literally the same one as a couple years ago, with the same power outputs and everything. Again, I like that engine, so I might say don't fix what ain't broken, but I could see this as being a deterrent for some Infiniti owners. I mean, really, why bother trading in a first gen for this? I don't need automatic climate control that badly. Now, for the 2000 model year, they did update a few things. The SR20 actually enters its third revision, and this is the roller rocker arm version, which is used in the B13 Sentra SE, and there is a slight power increase to 145 horsepower and 136 pound-feet of torque. For 2000, they also added an immobilizer to the security system, and the headlights now have an auto-off function. I mean, the Camry had auto-off headlights in the 80s, but okay, better late than never. They also added a tiny bit of wood grain around the shifter. I'm actually not sure if that was standard or an option, but most of the pictures I find seem to have it. An anti-glare coating was added to the exterior mirrors, and there are a few new color options. They don't really change anything for 2001, but for the final 2002 model year, they actually dropped the touring model, and in its place, there's a sports package, which will get you that limited slip, as well as special wheels, tinted headlights, perforated leather interior with two-tone seats, and silver-faced gauges, plus the other stuff that the touring model used to come with. They also did change the grille slightly for '02. It's now got these diagonal lines instead of vertical. 2002 was the last year for the G20. It never really sold that well, especially the second generation, but that's really not surprising since objectively Nissan was pretty lazy with this model. It's a pretty straight up rebadge, but I still think it's underrated because the Primera is kind of a cool car and the SR20 is a great engine. What do you guys think? For '03, the G-Series line leaves the Primera platform and becomes the Nissan Skyline-based G35, but it's really a whole different car at that point, so we'll talk about that one in another video.